Hi, it's Steve from Glasgow, Loves EU again. And this, I think, is our fifth chat we're having tonight. And we are very delighted to have with us Magdelena Williams. And she's had a fascinating life, which I'm hoping we'll just get a glimpse into because she's got so much to talk about. She's a passionate campaigner, pro-EU like ourselves, and specifically at the moment she's got a big campaign around the issues to do with shortages about medical supplies, particularly in the event of no deal. One of the particular areas of concern, as well as pill type meds, is the radioisotopes, which we were getting via the Euratom Treaty, which we will no longer be a part of, and cancer diagnosis and treatment is absolutely totally dependent on them. And the really difficult thing about them is that they have a very short shelf life, so any of them that get stacked up in lorry parks in Kent are not going to be of much use by the time they get to hospitals, particularly perhaps in Scotland, because we're quite far away. And we also need to talk about EU citizens in the UK, plighted refugee children, and the death of democracy, if we can fit all of that into just over half an hour. So, Magdelena, would you like to tell us just a little bit about yourselves, how you came to be here? And I'll roll that into the next question, because I think the two kind of will go hand in hand, which is, with your experience of the communist dictatorship in Hungary in the 50s, can you see parallels with the rise of nationalism in so many countries around the world, including the UK? And do you really think we're starting to see the death of democracy? So that's a big chunk of question.
Yes. Have you got 10 days?
About 10 minutes, maybe. But.
Yeah. Well, I first came to the UK in 1961 as a child because my mum got a place to study at Vienna University in Hungary. She wasn't allowed to study because of her family background, because we were not communist, but it was a landowning gentry family. And so she got a place at Vienna University, had to learn English for her degree. And she had 3 young children, so wonderful England at that time offered host families for the children. So I came to Sevenoaks in 1961. There's even a newspaper article about a Hungarian refugee family in Sevenoaks. And I went to an English school for months and so forth, and we made friends with the family I stayed with. And why I'm going this far back is that the father of that family we made friends with eventually ended up being my stepfather in 1970. I leave out the in-between, it's very complicated, but my mum married an Englishman in 1970. I came here to her wedding, met my ex-husband, stay here myself. That's how I came here.
That's very quick.
Yes, I had to cut back because otherwise I veer off. It's very complicated. So I came here with an Austrian passport. I had indefinite leave to remain after a while. I remember how difficult it was to come here with an Austrian passport before we joined the EU. I had a 3-month stay permit as a visitor to my mum's wedding. Then my stepfather had to find me a job, which gave me a year's stay permit in the end. And in fact, if I didn't marry my boyfriend, I would have had to leave the country after 1 year. So our hands were forced to marry a bit faster than we might have done it otherwise, because otherwise I would have had to go back to Vienna. Just to show you that, the EU was such an incredible advantage with the freedom of movement I wouldn't have had. But one thing that was a lot better, I got a British passport much more easily than EU citizens can get now. They have to jump through an awful lot of hoops. I got an indefinite leave to remain once I got married because I had an English stepfather and a British husband. Nobody talked about comprehensive sickness insurance or any complication, which they are bringing up now. In fact, it was very moving. I went to swear an oath in front of a Sevenoaks solicitor, and he didn't charge me for the act because he said if anybody's crazy enough to want to become British, then they deserve to have it free. This was the old days of British humour. So I had an English stepfather who was absolutely wonderful. He spoke 6 languages, which is unusual for English people. We came here a very impoverished refugee family. We were 3 children and so forth, and we came to this wonderful quite well off upper middle class area, and to a big house with an acre and a half garden and so forth. And I fell in love with the country. And London, of course, was just 25 minutes by train, and it was a big metropolitan multicultural city. I felt at home very quickly, and I decided I'm going to stay here myself. In fact, I broke off my studies. My mum wasn't very happy. I lost 2 years university studies, and I had to start all over again over here. And I ended up, I don't want to go into my very long career because I had 5 different careers, really, if I think about it.
Just tell us a wee bit about working for the Foreign Office and in the EU, because obviously that's relevant.
Yes, I was teaching psychology at the University of Canterbury, and the Foreign Office called them and said, do they have a Hungarian lecturer? And they said, no, they have a psychology lecturer who speaks Hungarian. So I ended up teaching Hungarian and Austrian German to diplomats, but Foreign Office in their wisdom closed the language center after a few years, and I had already got a British passport, and they decided to redeploy me for political work. Now, in the Foreign Office, you change jobs every 2 years. It's horrendously difficult. You become an expert and then you moved on. So I did lots. The penultimate, my last job was working in the Nigeria Directorate, Boko Haram and so forth. Before that, I worked in Europe Directorate, and it was the European Parliamentary and Communications team. So that's why I started campaigning when I retired in 2016. I started campaigning because it was part of my job to teach the diplomats in London about the EU, because my job was coordinating EU decisions. Draft decisions came to me from Brussels. I had to clear them through UK Parliament. So I am living proof of the fact that every decision is scrutinized by the 2 committees in Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And I already noticed incredible differences and very strong Eurosceptic influences in the scrutiny committees already. Bill Cash was heading the scrutiny committee. That says it all. So I had a very tough job clearing around 200 decisions a week.
Wow, 200 a week?
Yes, because people don't. Well, this is just an estimate. You can see it all. It's publicized on the parliamentary website, on the Cabinet Office website as well. The copies of the decisions are there, so people could easily inform themselves whether we agreed or didn't agree. Now, very briefly, again, quickly. So the draft came to us. We sent it to parliamentary committees. If they didn't like it, they sent it back. We sent it back to Brussels, and we said, no, Britain doesn't like it. We want this. And then it went back again. And so we had a very strong influence. And a lot of those decisions, which we suggested ourselves, it was us. It was the UK who wanted to expand the EU and take on other countries, and the 24 new countries who joined. It was the UK who wanted it. The UK was for Turkey joining. The UK, I've seen it happen, but sadly, when I went on the street from February 2016, I've been campaigning. I went on the street the months after I retired, and I said to people, here I am. It was part of my job. I know a lot. I've represented the UK at the EU, at African Union as well. Ask me questions. And sadly, most people said, out, this sort of face, out, and I had a lot of aggression already at that time. And you could not counter argument against the lies because they were emotional stuff, there was no fact that I could somehow disprove because they didn't want facts.
No,
Didn't want facts. So coming back to your question about comparison between a USSR-led, I mean, basically it was like an empire. Hungary was part of an empire. It was a colony of Russia. The education was influenced. See what they're going to do in Britain now, government having an influence on the curriculum. The judiciary was appointed by government. The media was government run. It's all happening again in Hungary, and it's starting to happen here. I mean, I remember just very briefly how personal this is, how bad it was in the end. I got really confused because I was taught something at school and I went home and my parents were horrified and told me something different. But they told me if I say something like this at school, what they're telling me now, they might be arrested and sent off to Siberia. From 8 o'clock onward, we didn't open the door unless somebody telephoned to say they were coming. We already had a phone, thank God. It was living in fear. What we are seeing now, the othering, the racism, the xenophobia, the attacks at people creates fear. And that's another comparison I can see. People living in fear because they're opposing what the government is supporting at the moment. It is very scary. Of course, it reminds me of 1930s Germany at the same time, because it's basically, I think, they call it horseshoe politics, where the far right and the far left are getting closer. Yes. So basically, it is, I think, a very dangerous time for democracy. It really is.
It's very scary, and we just don't know where we're going really at all with all of this, and just every day. I mean, I discussed about the democracy, or what feels like a lack of democracy, with Kirsten Oswald, who's one of the MPs in Westminster a few weeks ago, because it's, from what we see, there doesn't seem to be the proper kind of scrutiny of things going on in Westminster. There doesn't seem to be the proper voting systems. So much is done effectively by decree, and all these kind of contracts that are kind of sprayed out to friends of friends of friends of who.
People are underestimating the House of Lords, by the way.
Right.
Sadly, they don't have the power, because they can be overruled in the final instance.
Yeah, that's
but the amount of times the House of Lords, and I noticed that when I was working with them, they're much more Eurocentric, and they're much more seasoned, because they've got experience of various areas. And I know they're an unelected group of people, but at least they don't have party political forces working on them all the time, and they have a different system. You can actually go and give oral evidence at the House of Lords as an expert.
Right.
You can't at the Commons.
Okay. No, you can't. I think we've had a question come in, so if you want to read out a question for you.
Yep. So there's a question from Bill Roger, who says, education is devolved and legal system is separate aside from Supreme Court. So does Magdelena Williams' analysis point to another point of contention with SG?
Sorry,
Scottish government. Presumably she means.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not up to scratch with the Scottish government system, but I mean, I think we are still lucky that even in the UK, the judicial system at the moment is still working. I mean, I was standing outside the court when they discussed the parliamentary prorogation, and I'm very happy that this happened. I don't know what the system is. It the same in Scotland? Can they actually still call the government to account? Have they got the power?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because there's a lot of discussion at the moment about the power grab, which is what they're calling it. This idea of making you know, what they keep saying about there's no borders in the UK and we're going to have this single market within the UK. And basically what it seems to us in Scotland is they want to take away, to emasculate the Scottish and the Welsh governments in particular, taking all the powers that were devolved to us back into Westminster. And this is going to be a big bone of contention up here. But anyway, that's not our topic for today. That's probably for another day, and with somebody who knows a bit about Scottish politics. So
yes, sorry about that.
That's all right. It's fine. We'll move on to that. And it's interesting you mentioned about it was the British that were interested in Turkey joining the EU, because we all remember the scare stories about that. So my next point was. To do kind of not to do that exactly, but had the British, so sorry, there's this bit, is had the Brexit referendum mandate been extended to EU citizens in the UK and possibly UK citizens in the EU, do you think the result would have been different? So that's one part. But then how much do you think that the constant vilification of the refugee crisis, which barely touched on us in the UK in 2015-16, played into the narrative? And along with that, obviously things like, you know, you're going to get invaded by people from Turkey.
Yes.
So there's there's that aspect, and obviously what we're seeing with all the countries that they do think that they want to do trade deals with are going to just want to have their people be able to come here anyway, which is interesting. And but actually, to go back to the refugee aspect, is the plight of the refugee children, which I know is something else you want to bring attention to, and we do too. We've talked about that quite a bit as well.
So I go to the beginning of your long question.
Sorry,
no,
them together to,
yes, I know.
To leave us enough time at the end.
Yes, I definitely think that if the as promised, the EU citizens would have been allowed to vote, just like they were in the Scottish referendum, I believe. How come that Commonwealth citizens were allowed to vote? Now that is definitely biasing the result, because obviously my ex husband is Jamaican, by the way, of Jamaican origin. He voted leave because he really thought that not allowing in more Europeans means they're going to allow in more Black people or more Asian people and so forth. So basically people have been conned to believe that as well. The other side is that my brother, who has a British passport, lives in Vienna, hasn't been allowed to vote because he's been there more than 25 years. We're the only country who does that. I mean, if you have a passport, you should be allowed, if you are a citizen, you should be allowed to vote in the country, because his daughter lives here, he has very strong connections here, he comes to visit regularly. Basically, I think it is disenfranchising a huge number of people. I think it's about 1.6 million to 2 million Brits living in Europe. And of course, we are 3.6 million citizens. So, and I think the whole difference between the two votes was just 1 million something, or was it 800,000? I haven't got the figure in my head, but I think it would have made a huge difference, despite a few eccentrics who live in Spain and have voted leave. I sometimes think an intelligence test before people are allowed to vote might not be a bad idea.
We're not allowed to say that, are we?
I know we're not. There we are. But it's not people's faults, obviously, because as a psychologist, I know how easy it is to influence people subliminally. I've noticed even with friends who voted Remain, and they've been my friend for 40 odd years, and they know I'm a refugee and a migrant, and they come up with some statements that make my hair stand on edge. About it works on intelligent people as well. It's and they don't even notice it. I see it with Hungarian. Hungary has left next to no refugees in, none. Built a huge wall, and they actually put people in prison for feeding refugee children on the border. So it is so. It's the dehumanizing of other humans, which is so scary about it, because then people don't have a conscience. Compassion doesn't matter. People are worried about, I'm a big dog lover. I'm involved in rescue. Oh, the big outcry if a dog is being starved. but they are not worried about 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees starving, being abused without any family themselves. And they've got family here, so it's not as if the state has to take responsibility for them. And we have just in the new immigration bill decided not to allow them in. I've met Lord Dubs, who's an absolutely wonderful old man who came with the kinder transport and has been campaigning for several years to allow these children in. It breaks my heart to just imagine what it must be like. And any parent, however they voted, however they feel about, however strongly they feel about the EU, what has that got to do with the fact that children without families are abandoned in snow and ice at the borders and are not allowed to come to sanctuary?
And so many of them have actually died, haven't they, trying to cross seas
I know,
and things.
I know, and I am a refugee, so I know how difficult it is for people to decide to leave the country of their birth, where they established. We were very well off in Hungary, and then we had a very poor time as refugees for several years. It wasn't financial reasons, it was freedom, democracy, opportunities that every parent wants for their children, to have opportunities to make a better life for themselves than they have maybe themselves. And so we are creating wars, we are destroying the whole environment of countries, and then we don't help the displaced people. It is unbelievable. It really is unbelievable.
I know, and we could talk about that more, but we really must move on to the campaign, which is what we're here. The other thing we're here to talk about. So you've started this campaign called "No to Death by Brexit," which is to do with the problems that the medical supplies are going to have getting in, as I mentioned at the beginning. And what you believe is that it will cause many more deaths from 2021 onwards due to our withdrawal from the EMA, the medical agency, and Euratom, even if there's some basic deal agreed on trade. So, I mean, the sort of things I've heard on various talks I've been on is that people are saying that even if there is a deal, it will be an absolute bare bones deal because they've left so little time to discuss things. Okay. And what we haven't obviously mentioned is the whole, the phantom in the room, which is COVID as well, which is kind of, clouding over everything and impacting everything. And who knows what the trajectory of that's going to be over the next 5 months up until December. So tell us a little bit about your campaign and any suggestions of anything us or anybody watching this can do to help you, particularly on Wednesday, because I think that's your day of action.
Event, yeah. Well, we've started it more than 2 years ago. I had noticed that my blood pressure pill that the GP issued was different from what I normally got, so I asked why, and I was told that there's a shortage. There's a general shortage of certain medicines around the world, partly because India and China, where they supply a lot of the basic ingredients, are having production problems even before COVID. Now, COVID created 2.4 million backlog for cancer assessment and treatment. Some people are saying it's going to go up to 10 million by October, November, because now every other country has medical shortages, because we know that COVID survivors very often develop additional symptoms. So, for example, we know that people very often get, kidney disease, and now dialysis, as we said before, is very sensitive. It can't be stored over a long time, short shelf life, and it comes from the EU. Not only the liquid, the fluid they need, but all the other equipment that's needed with it, because for hygienic reasons, you have to constantly change things that you use. And we're talking about several hours treatment 3 times a week. I know because my stepfather had to have dialysis. And basically, it's a very slow and very bad death. It is basically a poisoning of your body if you don't get dialysis. And affects young people as well. It's not just elderly there. So in addition to kidney disease, diabetic, insulin is not produced. Human insulin is not produced in the UK. Again, it needs to be refrigerated. It does have, I think, a shelf life of about 3 months. But sadly, we hear that a no-deal Brexit will cause problems at the borders for about 6 months at least. What happens to the people who don't get the medicine on time? Epilepsy, also arthritis. My poor sister has rheumatoid arthritis, which is a very debilitating, painful immune deficiency. That is also treatable with very specific medication, and it also helps with the pain. If you don't get that, you are basically unable to exist. Life's not worth living if you don't get treated. So how can, and these specific illnesses have already put people under a higher risk during COVID. Now, how can we do it to them? How can we, for some political dogmatic reason, put lives at risk or impose more fear on the people who already struggle to survive COVID? In addition to that, I simply don't understand, and people must be made aware. Please check, first of all, whether your medicine that you rely on is on the list of the at-risk medicines. Then get in touch with the associations, the organizations of your particular conditions, like the Kidney Society, the asthma is also affected, the Arthritis Society. Write to them, write to your MP, write to the local paper, tell your friends. A big awareness raising campaign. I think this is just the beginning. We have to be able to demand, no, you are not going to have more avoidable death. How many deaths are okay? 60,000 avoidable deaths through COVID, not enough? Yeah. So basically, please don't accept it. Yes, send photographs on Wednesday with your message. If you are brave enough, send your personal message. If not, then just general messages. No deal means no meds. No deal, no meds.
That's very stark and very scary, basically. But I think you're probably right, unfortunately. And so yeah, we'll definitely be doing our best to support your campaign and advising people to join in, and let's hope we get a bit of you get some national attention for this, because it's certainly an issue that deserves it, and will affect so many people, and people who haven't even thought about it.
And it's nothing to do whether you voted Remain or Leave, because sickness, just like climate change, illness does not know political affiliation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, sorry to backtrack a bit, but we did have apparently one more question from Sophie about going back to the refugee children. Sorry to go backward.
No problem.
Sophie, if you'd like to let us know what it is.
Yeah, that's fine. So it's from Victoria Lee, and it says, the UK media, and I include the BBC in this, it seems to me has not accurately highlighted the issues with either Brexit or the human tragedy of the refugee crisis. Would you agree, and how might we influence this?
Well, by changing the people who are in charge of the BBC and don't allow it to be political recruitments, I suppose. I mean, I have not watched any BBC for a very long time now, for several years. I do love a lot of their dramas, etc., but I'm afraid news reports are not, my blood pressure can't take it. I would have to double my blood pressure pills. No, and it's very sad, because of course I love the BBC. By the way, the BBC World Service was our only access to proper news, to reliable news in Hungary. It was disrupted badly. We had the whining sound in the meantime, and we had to listen underneath it all to get proper news. So I love the BBC. I'm really sad about how it's been hijacked. So I think that's why social media has become more important. That's why we're doing this campaign, because I think sadly, I don't know whether Lord Doves is up to scratch. I think he would need somebody younger to try and highlight this. It's all links in with racism, it links in with Brexit, it links in with homophobia and populism, sadly. It's the divide and rule, othering other people, making us weaker, and spreading fake news. It's very sad. I don't think we can fight the BBC. I think we've got to use other media. Here's Byline Times, here's Sprouts, there's lots and lots of new papers are coming up, and we just have to use them and make them more powerful.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think particularly with young people, because they probably don't really read the mainstream media and probably don't watch BBC News, and they get all their information through social media outlets. Okay, before we go, we've had one other question back to the meds again from Sophie, or a correspondent.
Yep. So Bill Roger asks, where can we find the at-risk list? So for the medicines, like, where can you find the list of these?
If people tweet me or drop me a DM, or I'll send the link to Glasgow Loves Europe.
Oh, that'd be great. If you send us the link, we'll put the link on our page, and then anybody watching can pick that up. I mean, I've seen several lists, and some, the initial list I saw had even things ridiculously things like soluble aspirin on it, which seems like the most benign sort of thing that you could get, and lots of really common meds. In fact, I think every single medication taken in this house, of which there aren't masses, but there are a few between two of us, was on the list, and they're all common. And I remember my doctor once saying to me, one of the ones I'm on is, she described it as cheap as chips. So it's really cheap, but it obviously doesn't. It's not made here. And then other lists have said that supply has been sorted out. But part of the problem is that they stockpiled a load for No Deal Brexit, didn't they, back end of last year? But then they've gone through it all. They just whacked through it all through COVID. So there are no stockpiles anymore. So this is why we're going to see more generics when we go to the chemists and stuff, I think.
Yeah, can I quickly mention that it's not just human medicine? My vet has complained already last year that Brexit, because we left the European Medical Agency already, and the changes we've already gone in our relationship with the EU means that he has noticed delays and shortages, and there are several operations he has not been able to do on pets because the special anesthetic wasn't available. So, and by the way, 30% of pets come from the EU. He is one of them. He's leaving the country now. So it's farm animals are also affected. So farmers, please be aware, this medicine shortage affects your animals too. And I think 25%, 25% of the UK owns pets. Where are they?
I was going to say you might have more impact if you try and appeal to the pet lovers on the pet meds. I am
because I have two dogs, and my one dog has arthritis medicine, the other one has anti-epileptic drugs, and if I can't get them, they're in pain, and I can't watch children and animals in pain without being able to help them. It breaks my heart.
Okay. Well, I think on that very petty note, because as I say, where everybody loves their animals, and it is important. It is important to think about them. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. You are an absolutely fascinating person. I feel kind of thrilled and delighted to have met you, even if it's only over the airwaves of Zoom. And please keep in touch, and we'll do what we can to publicise your campaigns and stuff.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And say hi to Steve when you go down there, Steve.
I definitely will. I definitely will. We might do a live stream from there.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah, we'll watch that. Okay, thank you so much, Magdelena.
Bye. Nice to meet you all. Bye.
Okay.